I think we've gone through all the introductions of the people here now. Mauro, why don't you start? You like to start? Maybe you could start just a few words about your own background, you know, how you get where you are now, so that we can understand you as a person. And also you can be an inspiration for everybody, you know, who what to aim for, or like a North Star in what you can achieve in life, no?
Absolutely. And thank you so much, Gerhard, for inviting me. This is really an honor. And I consider right now to be in the middle of friends, so surrounded by friends virtually. This is wonderful. And we're going to be using the next hour and 20 minutes or so to think about what's going on in the world, what are some of the larger scale changes. And also, per your request, Gerhard, I'll tell you a little bit about the plans for the school and for the wider university, and what will be going on. So first of all, I'm Mauro Guillén, and I am the Dean of Cambridge Judge Business School since September 1st. So I am now in my 5th month, and very happy to be here, very, very excited. I am originally from Spain. Oh, I forgot, unfortunately, I'm not a fellow of Trinity College. I'm a fellow of Queen's College. So
it's never too late, you know, you can still aspire.
A little bit further upstream from you on the river. And I am a political economist and a sociologist by training. So I did a doctorate in Spain in political economy, and then I did my PhD in sociology at Yale University in the United States. So I was born and raised in Spain, and I'm very much still a Spaniard. And I think you can tell from my accent that I come from that country. And I then did my undergraduate studies and doctoral studies in political economy in Spain. And then I moved to the United States many years ago, more than 30 years ago, to study at Yale University. That was a transformational experience for me because, you know, I was coming from a country that was at the time in the 1980s still trying to grow economically, but with many, many shortcomings, especially in terms of science and technology and universities and all of that. So for me, moving to the United States was an eye-opener. And then I specialized within sociology in a branch called organizational sociology and economic sociology, which has many practical applications in the world of business. And I was very lucky when I graduated with my PhD to get a job at MIT. So that was my first job. For 4 years, I was there at the Sloan School of Management, and I absolutely liked it. It was an amazing place. But that's also in Cambridge, Massachusetts. I started dating my wife, and then she got a job in Philadelphia, and I was scrambling to also move with her. So I was also lucky the same year to get a job at the Wharton School, which, as you know, is the oldest business school in the United States and possibly in the world right now of the surviving business schools, more than 140 years old. And so I taught for 25 years at the Wharton School, and I was also involved in academic administration there. And in the middle of the pandemic, in the summer of 2020, I received a phone call one day from one of these executive search firms based in London, saying that they were looking for a dean for the business school. And they were asking me whether I would like to participate in the process. And I said, of course. And I submitted my CV and a cover letter and all of that. I went through at least, I think, 25 Zoom interviews. So everything happened over Zoom because it was in the middle of the pandemic. But, you know, by the month of February of last year, 2021, I was lucky. I was honored to receive the offer, and I accepted it within a week. All of that via Zoom. Okay, so I did not come to Cambridge. That was how confident I was that this was a very good opportunity for me. And of course, getting an offer to be the Dean of Judge Business School at Cambridge is just irresistible. You cannot say no to that kind of thing, right? And it was also good timing for me because my daughters, I have 2 daughters, and they're already in college or have graduated from college. So I didn't have any major children-related responsibilities anymore. And so I'm very, very happy to be at Cambridge. And today I'm speaking from my home in Cambridge on Grantchester Street. I don't know whether you remember, in Newnham, which is about 10 minutes south if you walk from Granta's place. Okay, so it takes me about 12 minutes to walk to the school. It takes me about 10 minutes to walk to Queen's College, and I feel very privileged. But Gerhard, if you allow me, before I tell you about how I see the school and how I see the university,
yes, please.
Because one of the greatest things about my first 5 months here has been that I am very much integrated with the university. I am not just through Queen's College, but also the Vice Chancellor and other Pro-Vice Chancellors have been asking me to join several boards and to join several projects. So I'll tell you a little bit about that as well. But the more important thing here is, how, the world is evolving. And then after we do that analysis, then I think it would make a little bit more sense to you in terms of the strategy that I'm coming up with for the school, and also the role that I'm playing in the university. Okay, so I'd like to focus your attention on three things. Okay, that are, I think, right now extremely important to grasp if we want to understand what's going on in the world. One is population trends. Okay, demographics. The second one is changes in the global economy, okay, which primarily, of course, have to do with the phenomenal rise of emerging markets. And third is technological change. Now, you may be thinking, oh, I've already heard about this. I know that demographics are changing. I know that the economy is changing. I know that technological change is taking over the world. But my point, as you know, Gerhard, in my book, 2030, is not to analyze these trends in isolation of one another, but rather to see how they converge on one another, to see how they coincide in time. And I call that, following a former colleague of mine at Wharton, lateral thinking. So lateral thinking is all about connecting the dots. So you take a look at things that appear to be completely unrelated, but if you think carefully about them, you start seeing that they are connected, that there are some connections. And that it is precisely right now, I think, in the world, the interaction among different kinds of things that are essentially making us go through a huge transformation, right? I think it is no exaggeration for me to say that we are going through a period of intense change in the world, nothing of the kind that I've seen over my lifetime. I think most of us were born either in the 50s or the 60s, perhaps the 40s, some of you. But since World War II, I don't think we have gone through as much change, as much transformation as we're going through right now. And of course, as you know, things take time. And for some of these big transformations to actually change the world, you need the trends behind them to be sustained over a long period of time. And that's exactly, what has been going on. Now, let me also say before you are wondering how exactly the pandemic changes all of this, right? The analysis that I'm about to tell you. And look, this pandemic has, of course, generated a big economic crisis. I think the economic crisis is behind us now. The pandemic, perhaps we're starting to see the light at the end of the tunnel, at least in Europe and in North America and in Asia, not so much in the developing world, unfortunately. But the pandemic has, of course, changed the situation, right? But this is a crisis that is different from other crises that we've had. So even pandemics, if you think, for example, about the plague of Justinian, right? In the 1500s, in Byzantium, right? In present-day Istanbul, right? That was a pandemic that was very, very important in history, because it was a pandemic that created so much chaos in the eastern part of the Roman Empire, in Byzantium, that they had to stop their plans to conquer Western Europe, right? So in other words, Justinian, the emperor, was on the brink of conquering Western Europe. And that would have meant, just think about it, the reunification of the Roman Empire as it existed before the fall of Rome, okay? Now, that never happened because of the Justinian plague, the pandemic, right? And so that pandemic changed history by sending, the world in a completely different direction, okay? If you take a look at the Black Death in the 1300s, another big pandemic, right? If you analyze it carefully, that was also a pandemic that changed the course of history. In fact, those of you who studied economics, you may remember that economic historians frequently refer to the Great Plague, the Black Death, as the precursor, as a prerequisite for the Industrial Revolution, because it made labor more scarce, right? So many people died, especially in the cities, especially skilled people, that it forced then everybody to become more efficient, to try to economize on labor, okay? So fast forward to COVID-19, I think COVID-19 is just the opposite of either the Justinian plague or the Black Death. Why do I say that? Because I firmly believe that this pandemic is a great acceleration of pre-existing trends. It is not a pandemic that represents a break with the past. It's not a pandemic that sends us in a completely different direction, right? What it does, it intensifies trends, right? So let me just offer two examples of this that I think will ring true to you. The most obvious example is that the pandemic is accelerating the adoption of technology, right? So take a look at how many people before the pandemic, especially people above the age of 60, were not using digital platforms that much for shopping or for entertaining themselves, but now they are out of necessity. In the world of work, now we're using, right now, or in the world of learning, right? We're using technology so much more intensively than before. So I think the use of technology, the adoption of technology is a clear example of acceleration as a result of COVID-19. Another very, very clear example has to do with demography. So people thought at the beginning of the lockdown phase 2 years ago that more babies were going to be born. Hey, people were at home with nothing to do, so they would just have more babies. And look, they were completely wrong. They were completely wrong, right? So as you know, what happens when there is an economic crisis, such as the one triggered by this pandemic, or when there is uncertainty just more broadly, people essentially put on hold big decisions. That's what typically happens, right? And young couples who perhaps wanted to have children in 2020, in 2021, they postponed having children because of the uncertainty, because maybe they lost their jobs, or maybe because they feared losing their jobs. And so, as an example, in the year 2020, right, the first year of the pandemic, in the United States, about 300,000 fewer babies were born than expected, right? So we were expecting X number of babies to be born, but the number in the end was X minus 300,000, okay? And that's because, once again, people postpone having babies. Now, why is this an acceleration? Well, it's an acceleration because, as you know, one of the most important things that has been going on in the world over the last 50 years in the developed world and over the last 30 years in the developing world has been the decline in fertility, the decline in the number of babies. And it doesn't matter how long we have been thinking about this. I don't think we have fully understood the enormous consequences of this, right? So the number of babies has dropped from an average of about 5 per woman in the world. And I'm using for this, given that you're all Trinity graduates, you like precision in these things. So I'm using the total fertility rate, okay? And I'm not using the crude birth rate. I'm using the total fertility rate. So it was about 5 in 1950 per woman, 5 children per woman. And nowadays it's only about 2.3, right? Now it's 2.3, that's the average in the world. But in Japan, in South Korea, it's more like 1, right? In South Korea, next door to where you are, Gerhard, it's actually only 0.9 children per woman, total fertility rate. That's really far away from replacements. And for replacement, you need a little bit more than 2 per woman to account for, it's a little bit more than 2 and not just exactly 2, because some babies never have babies themselves, right? And so that's the situation there, but that's also the situation in Europe, both Eastern Europe and Western Europe. It is a situation in Russia. It is the situation in the United States, in Canada, in New Zealand, in Australia. It is also becoming the situation in Latin America. Who would have thought that Latin America, right, after the explosive population growth of the 1950s and 60s, today would have total fertility rates of less than 2, right, in many countries, including Mexico, by the way. So, and then we have, for me, the most striking of all cases, which is India, right? So I don't know whether you remember when you were growing up, but my image of India when I was growing up is that families were very big, okay? In other words, that in India, there was a lot of population growth, and indeed there was during the 50s, the 60s, the 70s. But today, the total fertility rate in India is 2.2, which is barely above replacement. It's just above replacement. That is India. And India, of course, is a continent in and of itself. If you go to southern India, which is more developed, where the IT industry is, let's say Bangalore, right? So you consider the southern parts of India, then the number is definitely below 2. Whereas in northern India, which is more traditional, the number is 2.5, 2.6. So there are very large parts of India where the number is already below replacement, right? Now, let me just say one thing here. One is we just have to accept that this is going on and, of course, think about the consequences, the implications, right? But the other is I'm actually very happy about this decline in fertility for 2 reasons, okay? So the first one is climate change. I believe that the pressure on resources in the world and the problem of climate change would be absolutely intractable if we still had an average in the world of, let's say, 3 or 4 children per woman. It would be impossible, right? And so I think this is going to be hopefully one of the trends that will help us manage climate change, especially if we don't waste too much time now. And I believe we're wasting time on that. But the second reason why I think this is great news is because of the root cause of this decline. So we have to think about what is causing this decline in the number of babies. And every study that I've seen clearly indicates that the single most important factor is not the only one, but the single most important factor for the decline is women's access to education, okay? So what happens when women have better access to education? Something that, as you know, in many countries around the world has improved, well, first in places like Japan, Korea, Europe, the United States 50 years ago, but then more recently in other parts of the world. What happens is that women, when they stay in school, and maybe they go to college, and as you know, right now in several countries in the world, there's more women in college than there are men. Then when that happens, women postpone having their first child. So 100 years ago, women would have on average their first child when they were 16 or 17 years old. And therefore they would end up having 6, 7, 8 children because they started so early. And of course, there weren't any contraceptives, right? But today, in Europe, in Japan, in Korea, in China, increasingly, especially in the coastal areas, in the United States, women on average have their first child when they have 28 years old. And that is because they have been pursuing an education, because they're pursuing labor market opportunities, because they want to pursue a career. And I think that's wonderful, right? That women are doing that. But it also has this effect, which I think will in the end be beneficial long-term, especially in terms of the pressure on resources and climate change, of a decline in birth rate. For example, in Africa, I haven't mentioned Africa yet. In Africa, the average is 4 children per woman as we speak today. So it's still quite high. But if you examine that number by educational level, you get a completely different picture. So women with no education in Africa, they have on average 7 or 8 children today as we speak. Women with at least some education, primary, secondary, they have 6. Women with a high school diploma, they have 4, maybe 3. Women in Africa with a college education, they have 1 child on average. And that is exactly the same average for college-educated women in Japan, or in Korea, or in Europe, or in the United States. I call it the education one-child policy. So China had a one-child policy up until 5 years ago, as we all know. It was a brutal policy, right? Well, in the rest of the world, we've also had a one-child policy, but that one-child policy has come under the guise of women's education. The average worldwide of number of children for women who have a college education, I repeat, is 1 child, right? So this is the most important thing. Now, in addition to that, of course, people moving from the small village to the city, that has also made the number come down because you no longer need labor for the family farm, okay? Government policies, such as the one-child policy in China, have also brought down the number. But there is an issue here that I do want to put up as a huge problem in the short run, though, which is the imbalances by age group, and in particular, the future of pension systems. So let me just begin by saying that if anybody here attending this call is thinking that you're going to be collecting forever a nice pension from the state, I think you are deluding yourselves, okay? Why? Look, let me just use Japan, okay? In Japan, 50 years ago, the ratio of people of working age to people in retirement was 7 to 1. There were 7 people of working age in Japan for every person in retirement 50 years ago. Today is only 2 people of working age in Japan for every person who is in retirement. And by the year 2040, it will be 1 to 1. It will be 1 person in Japan working of working age for every person in retirement. I don't think it's sustainable, right? Unless, of course, you will have massive immigration of young people, which I don't think in a place like Japan is likely to happen. I don't think it's going to happen in Europe either, or the United States, because as you know, there is a backlash against immigration, okay? All right, so that's one set of changes in terms of demographics. The other big change that I want to bring to your attention is population aging, all right? So as a result of this decline in fertility, what we're seeing is that every generation of people now is smaller in number than the generation of their parents or their grandparents. And therefore, we're going into a situation in which the largest age group in every country in the world at some point in the future will be the population above age 60. All right? So this will be reached for the first time in Japan. In Japan, by the year 2030, 40% of the population will be above the age of 60. 40% of the population, right? I mean, that's a big proportion. Then will come South Korea, Europe, the US, Canada. Just a few years later, they will also reach that proportion. And a little bit after that, Latin America, right? And then the rest of the world. Even Africa at some point will get into that, because remember, the number of babies is dropping very, very quickly, right? And also we're living longer. We're living longer because of improvements in nutrition, because of improvements in personal hygiene, because improvements in medicine, of course, across the board. And now, well, those of us in our generation, on average, will live 6 years or so longer than our parents, and 11 years longer than our grandparents. But the effect is this massive population aging. But let me put on the table also for discussion another very important number. You see, those people above the age of 60 are not just going to be numerically very important. They're also going to become the largest segment of the consumer market by purchasing power. So the purchasing power of people above the age of 60 by the year 2030 is going to be twice as big in dollar terms in the world than the purchasing power of millennials. Now, by the way, I do a lot of work with companies, especially analyzing generations and demographics and all of that. And they continue to emphasize in their marketing and their advertising the millennial group. And what they don't realize is that the population above age 60 is going to be twice as big. not in terms of numbers, in terms of purchasing power. And let me just put on the table also for discussion another very important number. Between 60 and 80% of the net worth in the world is owned by people above the age of 60. The outlier here is the United States. 80% of the net worth of the wealth in the United States is owned by people above the age of 60. In Europe or in Japan or in South Korea, it's more like 60%. But this is really important. I mean, the center of gravity of the economy, the consumer economy, is moving away from younger people towards older people, right? And this is going to change quite a few things. Okay, so that's about demographics, okay? The second thing that I wanted to tell you about, if you remember, is about the economy, the global economy. And here I'm going to go much faster because I think you're as familiar as I am about the changes, if not even more so. So this is the rise of emerging markets. This has been going on for a long time. But now we're going to see in the next few years that the largest market is going to be China, right? Also the largest economy. And that shortly thereafter, India will also become very big. In fact, let me just say something that I mentioned in my book, and perhaps we should also discuss later. I think India, by the year 2040, will be the largest consumer market in the world. We will become bigger than China's. So China will continue to have the biggest economy because remember, the economy, GDP, is the sum of domestic consumption, exports, and investments. So China has more exports and more investments. But India, I think, will have a bigger domestic consumption, domestic market because it has a younger population than China. And you see, when it comes to consumption, the big differences have to do with durable goods such as homes, automobiles, and appliances for the home. And think about it, it's younger people who buy homes, who buy automobiles, who buy appliances, younger people. India will have, already has a younger population than China. And therefore, if you examine just that component of GDP, which is domestic consumption, I think by the year 2040, India may well be the largest consumer market in the world. So I always tell companies, look, I'm sure you have a China strategy because the Chinese consumer market is very important to you, but it's about time that you also had an India strategy because India is it's going to become at some point, maybe in 20 years from now or so, the largest consumer market. So that's the changes in the economy, right? We could go on forever, but I think you know them really, really well, in some cases better than I do. Now, the third is technology, and you also know this very well. So I'm also going to go quickly over this one. And then in the last 10 minutes of my presentation, I'm just going to tell you about lateral thinking, how I put all of those trends together, and then tell you a little bit about Cambridge and Judge. So when it comes to technology, of course, this is a change happening everywhere, right? Digital technologies, AI, big data. I think we frequently forget about 3D printing. I think 3D printing is going to change quite a few things. We also have now the metaverse. I think it's going to have enormous applications, not just in shopping and in entertainment, but also in the healthcare sector when it comes to therapies and so on and so forth, the metaverse, and on and on and on, right? So all sorts of technological change. So let me offer you a first example of how I connect the dots, okay? In a way that is actually relevant for what I'm about to say about Cambridge and Judge Business School. So let's think about the following three trends and see how they come together, okay? So first, we're living longer, okay? This is an established fact, right? Now, so much so that when somebody today in Japan or in Europe or the United States turns 60 years old, that person has, on average, another 25 or 26 years to live, right? Which is another lifetime. Think about an average, that's an average, right, of 25 more years beyond the age of 60. Okay, so that's the first trend. The second trend is the health span. That's different from the lifespan. The health span is for how long we remain physically and mentally fit, okay? So we remain in good shape so that we can continue to enjoy life to the fullest. And that has also been expanding, okay? It used to be, the case that many people by age 50 could no longer have an active lifestyle, or 55. But now the possibility of having an active lifestyle now goes well into the 70s, right? People age 70, 75, we still see them traveling around the world. Many of them continue to work. Many of them continue to do sports. So the health span has also expanded. And then the third thing, of course, is technological change. But I want to bring to your attention one very important aspect of technological change, which is that this massive technological change we're going through makes whatever it is that we learn at school obsolete much faster, right? So take marketing. Somebody who went to school and learned about how to do marketing 20 years ago didn't learn anything about digital marketing. So just imagine, right, without learning about digital marketing, how can you possibly be a marketer these days, right? So what do I make of the interaction among those three trends? Once again, life expectancy, health span, and technological change. Well, here's my prediction. I think people are going to go back to school several times. They're going to go to school first when they are in their 20s, in their teens and 20s. They're going to learn something. By age 40, they will realize that whatever it is that they learned is no longer as useful because technological change has made that knowledge obsolete. So they will decide to go back to school. Maybe they will use a virtual platform such as this to attend school. Maybe not. And then they will continue working. But by the time they turn 60, they will realize that they have another 25 years. But not only that, they will also realize that the state pension is not going to be enough. They will also realize that they're still in very good mental and physical shape and that they actually enjoy working. So at age 60, they're going to say, I'm going to go back to school and learn something so that I can continue working, perhaps on a part-time basis, and they're going to keep on working. So first prediction, I think people are going to go back to school several times, not just once. Second prediction, if people go back to school several times, there's nothing preventing them from switching careers. And as you know, this is increasingly happening. Right now in Europe, in the United States, perhaps no more than 3% of the population switches careers, right? But I think that proportion will be 5, 10, 15, 20% very soon. Okay, that is the trend. That's the way things are evolving. So I think as a result of this, we're going to see massive change in the labor market. We're going to see perhaps companies starting to think differently about their workers, their employees. Because as you know, many companies these days, when an employee turns 50, they're already thinking about how can they get rid of that employee, right? Especially in Europe, where the government actually helps you with early retirement, right? And other schemes. We're going to see, I think, also governments having to change in terms of regulations and in terms of how they think about or they regulate the labor market. But then, this is, Gerhard, in my last 5 minutes, where I'm going to get into Cambridge and Judge Business School. I think this also calls for a lot of changes in educational institutions, right? So as you know, this is normally referred to as lifelong learning. And I can tell you, lifelong learning is going to be the central element of the strategy of Judge Business School moving forward, right? So in other words, we want to engage learners, not just for 1 year or for a few years while they get their degree in Cambridge. We want to engage them for the rest of their careers, right? This is the central piece of our strategy. Why? Well, once again, because people, our graduates, increasingly feel that they need to retool themselves, that they need to learn new things. Also, of course, because we want to engage our alumni. As you know, having an engaged alumni community is extremely important, right? You have attended this call. You're very engaged. Keiko in particular is so engaged, right? Because as you woke up at 4 a.m. in the morning coming to attend, but not everybody is like you, right? Not all alums are equally engaged. And therefore, I think this is really important because, you see, one of the things that I should say struck me as the difference between American universities and Cambridge, right? Because people frequently ask me, you know, what is your feeling after moving from the US, having been in the US for 30 years, to Cambridge? And one of the things that I've noted is that, number one, Cambridge alums invariably say that their experience at the university was transformational. Okay, they always say that. But at the same time, European universities, including Cambridge, they don't do with the alums as much as American universities do. American universities have more systems in place for engaging the alums. And also, of course, that translates into gifts and donations and all the rest, right? So lifelong learning is going to be really important for the school. Now, technology is also going to be really, really important. We want to become the hub for startups and for ventures in Cambridge. We already do a lot of things. We have a lot of programs, some of them in collaboration with other parts of the university, that essentially try to help companies being set up in the Cambridge cluster, in the Cambridge tech ecosystem. But we're going to do even more on that. We're also going to be multiplying our research capabilities within the school to include all of the usual suspects, right? Finance and accounting, the future of work, entrepreneurship, EDI, equity, diversity, and inclusion, and ESG, really important for us, as well as international competitiveness, all of these research areas, okay? But then, and let me just end on this note, just a couple of minutes on this, Gerhard, integration of the business school with the rest of the university, right? So Cambridge is a powerhouse. Cambridge is, has a huge reputation in the world. The business school has everything to gain from more collaboration with other parts of the university on a number of dimensions. So the university, you may know, 2 years ago launched a huge new initiative called Cambridge Zero about climate change and about the environment.
Actually, we have the chief of Cambridge Zero will come talk to us in a similar event in June, I think. Please come, everybody here. I'm sorry for
it. Yeah, so I'm collaborating with Emily. Emily is the head of Cambridge Zero. I am collaborating very closely with her on new degree programs about sustainability and also research programs, right? And we are going to become clearly, if we make this work, the leading university in the world, because Cambridge already has the science, right? It has the knowledge, it has the technology, it has, so the other piece that was missing until now is the business aspect of it, because as you know, there's no solution to the problem of climate change unless businesses are on board and unless companies change, right? And there's change underway. So that's one big area of collaboration with the university. But we're also collaborating in another big area, which is the future of work. You know, this pandemic has changed work as we knew it, with virtual work, hybrid work, remote work. And so we also want to launch a major research initiative in collaboration with other parts of the university on this, okay? And that's going to be, I think, a really, really very, very important avenue for future collaboration. And then among all of the other collaborations that we're pursuing, we also have collaborations with the School of Clinical Medicine. But let me also mention one that I'm very, very fond of. As you know, creativity is everything in life, right? Creativity is everything in entrepreneurship. Creativity is everything in science, right? And we are going to join forces with the Fitzwilliam Museum, right? To explore the parallels between being creative in science or in business and being creative in art. Because if you think, when you walk through a museum, normally what you see is how different generations of artists attempted to be creative, attempted to break with the old paradigm and create a new paradigm, right? And so creativity, of course, is extremely important in the art world. It's extremely important in business, it's extremely important in science. And so I'm very proud of, the first few conversations that we're having with the Fitzwilliam Museum to also innovate in that respect. So let me stop there, Gerhard, if that's okay, since this leaves us, I hope, with enough time for comments or questions. Again, thank you so much for your attention. I hope I didn't bore you over the last 35 minutes or 40 minutes, and I'm all ears.
Mauro, thank you so very, very much for this amazing, passionate explanations of your agenda and your conclusions about where we stand and where we go. And if you allow me, I will start a discussion with 2 questions to you. And the first question is directly linked to Japan. On your book here, where do I have it? Here. In your book on page 188, you say that you talk about towns and population centers, and you say that an organization called CityLab has classified cities and metropolitan areas around the world into 3 categories. And the first one are the global giants. And you mention 6 global giants, and these are New York, Los Angeles, London, Paris, Tokyo, and the Osaka, Kobe, Kansai area. So that means that 2 out of 6 global giants are Japanese. 1/3 of them are Japanese. Now, because we are Trinity in Japan and we are Japan focused, I thought I'll start a discussion with this. So my point is the following, with my company, one of the things I do is quite a few global giants, like #1 global toy company or several Silicon Valley software as a service companies come to us and ask us, Gerhard, we are #1 in all major markets, except in Japan, where we don't even know our market share, and then when we work with them, we find out that their market share in Japan is number 30, and they have been here already 30 years. And so then I have sessions as part of the projects. I have sessions with their top management, CEO, CTO, CFO. And then what I do with them, often overcoming resistance, is I do a knowledge test about Japan. What I tell is, top managers, CEOs of big global multinationals, I tell them, look, your job is to take decisions about investments and other things regarding Japan. Let me test your knowledge about Japan, because do you want your decisions regarding Japan, do you want that being based on knowledge and facts, or do you want to have it based on something you hear in a pub or you thought always or something? Yeah? And I won't mention to you what the results are of these knowledge tests on top managers of top corporations about Japan, European, for example, or US, and I can tell you it's shocking. So my question to you is, don't you think that Japan is often underestimated globally, especially in Europe? And in my experience, many European top managers have much bigger mind share for Singapore than for Japan. And Singapore, like you said, you ask companies, what is your India strategy? Sometimes I ask these top managers, they tell me about Singapore. I said, okay, Singapore is about the size of Yokohama. What is your Yokohama strategy? That's my question.
Yes. Yeah, look, I don't claim to know Japan well, but I have read a lot about Japan, and I have tried to understand Japan's role in the world, right? Because as you know, I'm above everything else. My research is the study of globalization. And Japan is not just a very large country, population-wise, and also a very, very important economy, both in terms of manufacturing and in terms of technology and finance, right? Let's not forget half of the foreign holdings of US Treasury bonds are in the hands of Japanese investors, right? So we frequently forget about that. I mean, we're always focusing on China these days. Mm-hmm. And so what is important here, I think, for all of us to also think is that Japan is also a very vibrant culture, a millenary culture with its own art and architecture and everything. And that is, as you know, has been very influential in the world in terms of design, in terms of architecture, all sorts of things, right? So the cultural influence of Japan around the world has been phenomenal over the last 140 years since the Meiji Revolution, right? And so I am not surprised when I see those rankings of global cities that you alluded to. And there are 2 metropolitan areas, so one Tokyo, Yokohama, and the other one, Osaka, Kobe, to be among the top 6 or 7 in the world. because once again, the cultural influence of Japan is enormous, right? And think about it also from the point of view of popular culture, right? So comics, okay, video games, films, but especially comics and video games, right? The influence of Japan is enormous, next to none, right? On a par with that of the United States in the world, right? When it comes to that.
Well, Japan is the only country which can stand up to Mickey Mouse, you know?
Exactly, absolutely. Animation, all of these things. So I'm not surprised, because through that popular culture in the form of comics or animations or video games, that's a way in which actually the urban culture of Tokyo, Roppongi, right, and all the rest, the urban culture of Osaka, Kobe gets broadcast to the world. So I'm not surprised by that. And by the way, we haven't even talked about the world of fashion.
Oh, yes.
And the world of gastronomy. I mean, the number of influential chefs in the world, the number of influential fashion designers who recognize that they found inspiration in Japanese culture and Japanese design is staggering. So I think we frequently underestimate the impact of Japanese culture on the world. It's enormous, right?
Regarding
and it's enormous both in terms of the highbrow culture, obviously, because Japanese culture is very sophisticated, but it's also in the form of popular culture, as I mentioned, animations, video games, and comics.
Regarding the culinary aspects, you know, the number, Tokyo has by far the most, what's it called, the stars, Michelin star cooks, you know, but in my opinion, that tells you more about the limited resources of Michelin to investigate Japanese cooking than the other way around. Do you know what I mean?
Oh, absolutely.
And the other point is, also, I think you should also mention in that case innovation. You know, for example, Japan is also a world record innovator. For example, mobile internet. You know, today when we think about mobile internet, we think about iPhone. But number one is mobile internet started with iMode in Japan, just as one example.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely.
Can I ask you the second question, and then we'll have discussion with everybody. You know, the second question is, you refer politely that everybody loves the well-known methods of creating babies. So, and because everybody loves it, so I thought I'll wake people up with the second question. You know, rightly so, you place enormous importance on fertility. And in your book and also in the talk today, you usually refer to fertility as a number of babies per woman, you know, fertility rate of women. And you look at different education of women, which reduces the fertility per woman. But embarrassing for us men, important research in Nature, and I sent you one reference of a Nature paper before, there's a lot of scientific research which indicates that the sperm count of men is falling. And I think the reason for that is unknown. And now, could there be a gender bias here? You know, that there are far more male researchers than women researchers. And therefore, the men researchers find the fault with the women of declining fertility. You know, I missed this point about falling sperm count in your book.
Yeah, I know that, Gerhard, is a good point. And I was aware when I was writing the book about that research. Yeah, it is, you know, kind of interesting because if you remember historically, when couples had to go and get fertility treatments because they couldn't have a baby, normally doctors would always first check on the woman, right, to see if
men doctors, right. No? The doctors were all men.
Exactly right, and not on the men. And it is true that the sperm counts are declining, and a lot of it has to do, by the way, with stress and with pollution in the environment, and and all of the things that come with modern life. And I think this is an important factor. Now, in the broader context, right, of things, in the grand scheme of things, when you take a look at the big picture, the decline in fertility, most of it, as I was mentioning earlier, has had to do with women's access to education, right? So in other words, it has had to do with the postponement of the first child, right? And of course, with the availability of contraceptive methods. So no doubt that this issue of the declining sperm count also has an effect. And it also tends to reduce the fertility rate. But it's not, in terms of the quantity, it's not as big as the others, right? I mean, let me put it that way. But it is very important because that you bring this up, because as you know, it can be very frustrating for certain couples not to be able to have a child. And as you know, the probability that there will be problems for couples to essentially have a child gets multiplied as with age. And again, what we're seeing is that people are thinking about having children at a later age these days. So it's not just a decline in sperm count, it's also that is accelerated by age, and that in the more developed parts of the world, people start thinking about having children when they turn 30 years old, right? And so all of these then, and some people are trying to have children when they're 35 or 40 years old, and then the problem gets compounded. But it's a very interesting, I was keenly aware of it. But again, in the broader picture, it doesn't have such a massive quantitative effect.
Thank you so much. So let's open the discussion up to everybody here. So please, when you ask a question, start by introducing yourself. Please tell us who you are. Stanislas, you're the first to raise.
First, I want to thank Mauro for his brilliant pitch. I really liked it.
Can you introduce yourself?
Just yes, I think you did that earlier. So my name is Stanislas, and I'm Capgemini for 30 years. So technology, for sure, I get that. And I'm an old friend of Gerhard, 50 years now. So Mauro, two things I wanted to say. First, I had not seen, as well as you outlined it, the link between the positive consequence of less fertility to climate change. And I'll think about it, and it's very profound. And I must say, it's the one thing I'll take away from your pitch today, which really didn't get to it before. And I think we all underestimate that in this kind of pessimistic view of climate change, there's one sign of hope, which is demography is with us, not against us. So that's number one. Second, I would like to propose another link between the different transformation areas. You mentioned technology, of course, this is key to my heart, and you mentioned workplace. I think there's a further combination which is also positive. With AI, automatization, 3D data, algorithm, etc., there will be a possibility to take away complete areas of repetitive, administrative kind of clerk work in insurance and many other industries, which of course will reduce the number of jobs, which is, could say bad, but to a degree would create more qualified jobs elsewhere, which is good. So to me, there's something to be developed in terms of research, which is how technology, the areas we mentioned, will help make work more exciting for the future generation, more qualified, more interesting, more added value for people who have a work. And this is one thing I think we should work on.
Yeah, that's a great question, Stanislas. And I don't know whether I'll be able to supply you with a comprehensive answer, right? I think the future of work is not necessarily to be defined in terms of where we work from, whether we work from the office or we work from home, but rather whether we can now reimagine work, reinvent work in such a way that is a smarter work, is better for both the companies and for the employees, right? I think that should be the goal. So I think too much of the discussion right now is about what should be the proportion of the time that people spend working from home versus working from the office. And I think that's the wrong way, right, to think about it. I think we should be using technology such as all of these platforms so that we can have better results in the end, better results in terms of productivity, in terms of creativity, in terms of performance, but also certainly also better results in terms of worker satisfaction, right? And so I think we're only at the beginning of this. I mean, the pandemic is only 2 years old. So this massive experiment that we've had with remote work, it's only 2 years old, really, right? In its current incarnation. And I think a lot of research needs to be done. I think consulting companies such as Capgemini and others, from what I see when I interact with them, there's a lot of work going on right now trying to help clients make the most out of this new trend, right? But I think, again, more broadly, I think universities, business schools, governments, companies, consulting firms, I think consulting firms such as yours will be really important. We need to get together and launch big projects, right? Research, good research, to see whether we can improve the way in which we get work done. And I think the sky is the limit here. We should just try to embrace the new possibilities that all of these new technologies are bringing us. And by the way, I don't know whether you feel the same way as I do, Stanislav, but I think that virtual reality, I think enhanced reality, I think the metaverse are going to be really interesting tools to use in this respect. Actually.
I agree.
So that's my mindset, right? And by the way, we were commenting with Gerhard earlier. I would be very, very happy to have a separate conversation with you to see how we can make progress in this respect, right?
Yeah, let's do. We can do that separately afterwards.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Stanislas and Mauro. So who else wants to ask a question? What about Keiko-san? You got up at 4 a.m. Where you are so... sorry, why don't you add the next so that you can maybe have another nap? Keiko-san? Keiko, are you here? Keiko, hello.
Yes.
Yes. Why don't you ask a question if you have before, because you got up at 4 a.m. So please go ahead.
Thank you. Actually, yes, I was maybe I have my phone also, like I'm connecting to this and maybe it has some background noise. So yes, thank you very much. First of all, Dr. Mauro, it was very insightful. And also at the same time, I could connect even myself to what you were talking about. So it was great. First of all, I thought Newnham is always a great place. I was there till 1 year ago. I just lived only a block away from Newnham Croft Primary School. So it's always the great place inside Cambridge, I believe. So you got the right place. And also, maybe I have the right number of children, maybe according to the statistics. So I have 2 so far, and I'm not sure. So the youngest one is 1 year plus, like he's like 15 months old. So I'm not sure if I'm going to have another. But then you mentioned that globally, women are having their child like around 28 years old. Maybe I had mine when I was 27. So I thought I was very early for my Japanese women's standard, especially having some educational background. But then it seems like it's the right timing globally. And then I had another one like a few years later, like after I finished my MBA. So you're very right. We always think about when to have children, and I had it right after I finished my MBA. And I'm also like coming back to education time to time, even after I started working. So after I started my career, I graduated from Japan. I actually went to Swarthmore College, which is also in Pennsylvania. And many of my friends back then also go to Wharton Business School. So I just had like many connections what you were talking, and it was very insightful. Maybe what I'd like to ask is, there are several, but the biggest thing, or maybe before that, the climate change thing, I work for a World Bank Group, as Gerhard introduced me, and it's not only a perspective anymore. Like we are not only talking about adaptation or mitigation of climate change, but it's also a driving force of our business, even for, I believe, like emerging countries. And for countries like Japan or like maybe certain developed countries, it's also a driving force, even for Japanese corporates. And they are like looking for the ways how they can expand their market in that area. So that was very, I don't know, to the point that with my interest. My biggest question is from your view, like that you mentioned like several big trends in the world, and what do you think of a Japanese economy for them and for us to like survive afterwards, especially with this aging economy? And I was very happy that you mentioned about the culture and also some type of like Japanese technology that companies like invented maybe more in the past, but not really disseminating well or marketing well to the world. I think we have like some interesting culture, not really, we are very much well adapting from abroad, but not really good at marketing ourselves to the world. Maybe because of like certain barrier or language barrier, or because of our geographical location, but wanted to have some view on that. Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you, Keiko. So again, I'm not an expert on the Japanese economy per se, but I think that your observations were really, really important and on target, right? I think Japan obviously has a demographic challenge. But Japan is not alone. Other countries have the same demographic challenge. But it continues to be a very innovative economy, at least in certain fields. And of course, you know, it is in a part of the world that is extremely dynamic, right? With South Korea, with China, and Vietnam, and so on and so forth. So I think, you know, we have to give it some time, right? I mean, I know that Japan has been in dire straits since the 1990s, you know, because of deflation, because of the population problem, because of the bursting of the real estate bubble. I mean, all sorts of problems, right? And it is true that people believe that Japan was going to take over the world as an economy, but then of course that didn't happen. But that doesn't mean that the Japanese population is worse off. In fact, Japan has one of the highest standards of living in the world. But it is a country and an economy that, in the context of population aging, in the context of deflation and so on and so forth, it's a country that needs to reinvent itself. But we all do. I mean, I don't think, you know, people were saying 20 years ago that Japan was, you know, in dire straits, that it was a very difficult situation and all that. But hey, who doesn't have a difficult situation today? So Japan is no longer alone in that plight, in that you know, very difficult situation. Look, I mean, I think there's only one way forward, which is, we know that educating the population, or having an educated population, is really important. Japan has that. We know that it's very important to place an emphasis on flexibility, on innovation, and at least in some parts of the Japanese economy, that's also the case. Is it necessary to go through more political reforms and regulatory reforms? Of course. And that's true of every country in the world. I continue to believe that it's true of Japan as well, right? So I think, you know, this is a globalized world. We're all on the same boat. It's just that we have jumped on the boat at different moments in time, and Japan was perhaps the first country to get into all of these problems, right? Yes, the last 30 years have been, you know, not stellar, right, for the Japanese economy in terms of growth, and there's a lot of inertia, unfortunately. But I continue to be optimistic, and what I think is really, really important, and by the way, this is also a comment that I would make about China, is not to isolate oneself, right? I think that the general form of the solution to most of these problems is to continue being engaged with the rest of the world, right? I see, for example, right now, quite frankly, a danger in terms of China trying to insulate itself from the world, right? And I don't think that is a good thing. In fact, as we all know, China's decline started 250, 300 years ago, when they decided to turn their back on the rest of the world. And look, Japan didn't really develop until it went through the Meiji Reformation and it started to, engage with the rest of the world. So that's the way I generally see it. But again, I must admit, Keiko, that I'm not an expert on the Japanese economy. Okay, but as a researcher on globalization, that's what I would say about the situation.
Gerhard, can I just?
Thank you, Keiko.
No, yes. By the way, I think today is the best example of the early bird gets the worm. So I will keep listening to the lecture. It's okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Keiko.
Thank you so much.
If I may, can I ask Pico to ask the next question? Pico, are you here? Pico-san? Pico is a graduate of Cambridge University, but not business school and not Trinity, but she is one of the top, she's an investment banker at CVC, which is one of the big London-based funds. So please, if you have questions, Pico.
Yes, so I was going to ask a question on, around the topic on fertility and women. I was wondering, so I was thinking about that, and I've been thinking about that quite a lot lately. And I was thinking about how when I was a child, I actually grew up in China, where I actually, I had a nanny because it was quite cheap back then. It was like 1,000 pounds per month. And it was very affordable. So my mother didn't really have to do much work raising me. And I think now I'm an investment professional with CVC. And I think globally in private equity, women, there aren't that many women joining. And I think even thinking about having family and things, I think it's just quite unthinkable thinking about the working hours and the workload. And I was thinking about, but whereas my colleague in Hong Kong, like female colleagues, they were saying, they have cheap nannies in Hong Kong, and that's why she can still work the hours she does, but still have babies. And I was thinking maybe the availability of immigrants or cheap labor is quite key for women having children, even if they are educated and have careers. But I think maybe in terms, I was wondering about your views in terms of maybe globally, there's less immigration, and also I guess the salary level is increasing globally, even in China or less developed places. So I was wondering about your views on that. Thank you.
Yeah, well, Biko, I'm going to be very, I think, aggressive here. Look, I don't think immigration in the end will be the solution to that problem, because as you know, there's politically quite a bit of a backlash to it, right? I think it's going to be automation. I think we're going to have to use robotics for a lot of things, including taking care of children when the parents are not there. I think we're going to have to use robotics for taking care of people at advanced ages in their homes who will no longer be able to take care of themselves. We just don't have enough young people to help with those situations, right? Because again, there's been this dramatic fertility decline. And there is a backlash against immigration. I'm an immigrant myself, so of course I'm very much in favor of immigration, but I recognize that right now the political climate around the world has turned against immigration, or at least larger scale immigration, especially in Europe and the United States, right? And so I think automation is the way to go. In Japan, there are several companies, including some of the big ones like Toyota, that are experimenting with robotics to take care of children, with robotics to take care of elderly people in their homes. And look, the early experiments, I refer to this in my book, are that both the children and the elderly, they prefer to be taken care of by a robot for different reasons. So the technology is still not perfect. But I can perfectly see how the convergence of robotics, automation, artificial intelligence, and so on, the metaverse, in the end is going to offer us solutions. So in other words, that we may be able to take care of children with robots. We may be able to take care of people who can no longer take care of themselves, but they can stay at home, but with a robot. So I'm convinced that that's what's going to happen. Give it 5 to 10 years, and I think we're going to be in that kind of world.
Thank you. That's very interesting. Yeah, I think if I think about my early days, I don't remember kind of my early days. So perhaps even if it's robots, I'll be happy to. Yeah, thank you.
But I'm not a baby now, but my guess is that babies like to be held, I think, by humans.
Well, but the toddlers in experiments, so there's been all of these experiments with robots taking care of toddlers for a couple of hours while the parents go out and have dinner, okay? And the toddlers report that they prefer to be taken care of by the robots, not surprisingly.
Really? I know about a venture in Japan which makes, I think, penguins or something, like they make robotic animals for dementia patients, so that dementia patients can hug this robotic animal as a kind of, activity therapy.
Yeah.
As you mentioned, the importance of robotics here. Can I ask Ken?
By the way, and Gerhard, just a quick point. Japan is one of the powerhouses in the world when it comes to robotics.
Of course.
So Japan, Japan is on a par with the United States in terms of being at the forefront of robotics.
Of course.
The robotic economy in the world is essentially 5 or 6 countries. The top ones are the US and Japan. And then the other ones that are very strong in robotics are Taiwan, South Korea, Germany, Switzerland, and Italy. Those are the top countries in robotics, right? Yeah.
Well, there are many fields where Japan is globally number one. Another one is transportation. I can't say that very loud, but I think the best would be if Europe would sell all the railway companies to Japan, because Japan is much, much better at managing railways than anything in Europe, except the Jungfraubahn in Switzerland. They are very good. But all the other ones in Europe are much, Japanese railway companies are much, much better. Anyway, next question is Ken Shinohara. What about you? Do you like to ask the next question? Ken is also one of your alumni from Judge School.
Thank you very much, Gerhard. And it's really a great honor for me to talk to the Dean of the Business School. So in that context, I have a couple of questions. I felt it's really interesting for you, Mauro, to mention about the lifelong learning. And in that context, what do you see the role of business school in the future in terms of the lifelong learning? And what do you see business school in the context of the UK? Because some people say that traditionally UK universities have been focusing on undergraduate education and compared with the US counterparts. So in terms of that, what do you see the role of business school, which is mainly focused on the graduate school and practical education?
Yeah, thank you, Ken. So look, I'm going to say something that I think for me is rather obvious, but not a lot of people are convinced. So I think there's never been in the history more of a need for good managers, because we're going through so many transformations in the world as a whole, the economy, but also companies, organizations, they're having to incorporate the digital revolution, changes in the nature of work, as we were discussing earlier with Stanislav. So we're going through so many transformations, economic, geopolitical, demographic, technological. We need people to manage those transformations at the organizational level, in companies, in the government, in nonprofits, and so on. So I think the future of business schools is very bright, because society and the economy needs more people with managerial skills now than ever before. Now, having said that, I think business schools, then we also need to change. We need to incorporate lifelong learning. We need to be more flexible. We need to innovate when it comes to different degree programs and so on and so forth. The last part of your question, I see the UK universities as being absolutely fantastic, right? And they have accomplished, I think, in terms of the quality of what they offer, and especially Cambridge, right? So much without having the resources that, for example, American universities have. So with fewer resources, right, of every kind, I think UK universities have done so much more, right? So I'm very optimistic about it, right? But then, as you know, it's no longer just the US and the UK. There are business schools, very good business schools now in Europe. There are now increasingly very good business schools in Asia, especially in East and Southeast Asia, all the way from China to Singapore. And I think business education is becoming a truly global business. It used to be a business that was, or an activity that was monopolized by US business schools, but that was a long time ago. Now it's no longer the case. So I think it's becoming a global landscape out there. But once again, I think there is room for business schools in many parts of the world, because I think the demand for good managers will only continue to grow because of all of these transformations. Organizations are scrambling to adapt to all of this, and they need good managers for that.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you very much. Yeah, it's really convincing to me, because traditionally the university is more like silos to each department, but I view the business school as a kind of catalyst of that kind of expertise. So in that sense, yeah, I personally see the role of business school as a kind of catalyst, or a kind of collaborator of these kind of expertise. So yeah, thank you very much.
I think, Mauro, I completely agree with your very high estimation of British universities. And I think one of the secrets for the success, you know, I was about 13 years in Cambridge, first for my PhD and then 10 years as faculty. And I was in Germany. I'm Austrian, so in Germany I did my first degree studies. I was also a professor at Tokyo University. So, and I was also professor once at École Normale Supérieure in Paris. So I could compare several systems. And I think one of the big secrets of British universities is that there is no ministry on top of the universities. You know, most countries have a very powerful ministry or several ministries on top, which command the universities. And so essentially the universities outsource their management to the government, you know, and many countries run their universities in the way they run the customs border control posts, you know. So I think that's, in my experience, one of the biggest component to the success in Britain is freedom, essentially freedom. What do you think?
Yeah. No, absolutely. I think, well, freedom and competition. Look, I mean,
of course. Yeah.
I think we can all agree, you know, sometimes, as you know, and maybe this will be my final thought, given that we're approaching the time, but so very quickly, Gerhard, oftentimes you hear from academics that the market is bad, that capitalism is bad, and all of those things, right? And you know what I think is really important is to focus on the concept of competition, though.
Yes.
So in other words, really importantly, science makes progress because different researchers compete with one another to have the best data, to have the best theories, to come up with the best interpretations of the natural world. The same goes for research in business. So we're always competing to see what is the best practice, what is the best approach. So I think for me, competition is the key thing. And as long as we have competition among universities, as long as we have competition among companies, among entrepreneurs, I think we're going to see progress. We're going to see breakthroughs. We're going to see improvements. Right? But for me, competition is what's really, really important. And it lies at the core of the scientific enterprise.
Not only scientific, everywhere. Everywhere. Thank you so very much, Mauro. I think if I remember well, you have your next appointment coming up. So
yeah, it's actually a meeting with the university about one of these big projects. It's a big project. I didn't tell you about it. it's a big project about Africa. So Cambridge is going to have a major, this will be announced soon, a major initiative about Africa. So we have a meeting right now in 3 minutes, yes, about this big project. The business school is one of the participants at the table in this project.
Thank you so very, very much, Mauro, for your fantastic, enthusiastic engagement, all your passion. Thank you, and I hope to see you soon again. Bye-bye.
Oh, no, absolutely. Thank you, everyone, okay? Please stay in touch.